Welcome into the Footy Pod. Today is the first of 2 Euro preview pods. It's only 2 sleeps away. Isn't this exciting? We'll focus on groups D through F with the voice of football in this country, Kristian Jack. How will Scotland win it all? Can Gareth Southgate play 4 right backs for England, even though there are only 3 in the squad now? Is this a transition year for Germany and Spain? Who can stop France? And is this the best Portuguese team Cristiano Ronaldo has ever had, and more? That's today on the Footy Pod. And we welcome in my co-host, Gregory Caltabanis. Greg, how are you?
Hey, John, it's long overdue. Looking forward to it.
Long overdue, indeed. And yes, as I said earlier, the voice of football or soccer in this country, Kristian Jack. Kristian, how are you?
Far too kind for the introduction. Doing great, fellas. Great to be on with you, boys.
All right, so let's dive right into it. Group D. How can Scotland win the tournament, Kristian Jack?
Wow, you're going right to the top, eh? The Scots. I know you're beloved Scotland, John. They're in the tournament. Great to see them, by the way, back in a major tournament. I know it's been far too long. I think it's a group of opportunity, is it not, for the Scots? I mean, you're playing games at home. You're playing the old enemy, where I think that's a great game for Scotland because no one's going to give you a shot, and England can't win that game. They can only just get 3 points because it's like, if you win, it's like, well, you're supposed to win. You beat them anyway, and if you don't win, it's like, doom and gloom. So, I think it's a good day for Scotland to go into the tournament feeling positive.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I've always wondered how they're going to do this because, like England with their right backs, it's Scotland with Andrew Robertson and Kieran Tierney. I mean, you're going to have Che Adams up top declaring for Scotland, kind of giving them a striker they've never really had. Scott McTominay and John McGinn in the middle of the park as well. There's just never been a team that has had kind of this level of skill for Scotland this year. Do you think, as much as my ego is talking about the fact that Scotland could win this tournament, do you think they can get a result against England?
I do, yes. I think a lot of it depends on the first game for Scotland. I think a lot of the previews that I've been doing, I was talking to somebody on my Sirius XM show about Wales this week, and I thought it was very similar for them with their first game on Saturday against Switzerland. A lot of the games, I think, are so important in the first games, the way it's been drawn up. And I know England-Scotland isn't the first game, but my point being is that, that first match against the Czechs is a real opportunity for Scotland to start well and then have a boost going into that game against England. Imagine the scenarios, right? You win the game against the Czechs. Traditionally, you could get through this group with 3 points. Suddenly, you win that game and you keep the games close and the goal difference, and you've got a great chance to get through to the last 16 already. So I think the last thing you want to be doing is coming into that England game knowing you've just lost and you've got 2 massive games to play against England and Croatia. But I do think that, they can go into that with a lot of confidence. You mentioned some of the players that you mentioned have played. What I like about Scotland is a lot of their players are going to be relying on playing significant minutes, and they're playing minutes at big-time clubs. You mentioned a lot of them there. We didn't even get into like McTominay at Manchester United, who I think has been very good for them and sometimes gets a little bit underrated at that moment. I like Callum McGregor a lot as well in midfield, and obviously Tierney and Robertson. McGinn's been tremendous for Villa. So, there's a lot of things to like, Greg, about this Scotland team. And the one thing I would say, though, is, as John would know, is that no one does spectacular failure better than the Scots. No one has you on the edge of being what could be and crushing you in the final moments of anything than the Scots. They are genuinely the world champions at it, really. So I just would hope that they can do that and not do that this time and suddenly get over the line and not have everyone believing they're going to get there until the final seconds, like they've done so often in major tournaments or major international competition in rugby and other things. But yeah, I don't think it's a group they should be too fearing of,
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned Wales getting off on the right foot in this tournament, and the importance of winning that first game. I personally, when I look at this group, I'm trying to look back at Euro 2016, where Wales actually finished ahead of England, and it was one of those scenarios where you beat the teams you need to, you keep it close against maybe the group favorites, and then next thing you know it, they're in the knockout stages, and with a bit of luck, some solid defending, and a cohesive unit which Scotland, they seem to have that, at least that aspect down packed. They could be dangerous. I'm not picking them as my tournament dark horse by any means. But for once, they finally have that talent playing significant minutes in Premier League action. John mentioned it. Che Adams. The Premier League left backs, Tierney, deputized, or just playing at left center back with Robertson a bit ahead of him on the left wing back. They could be dangerous. If they need, some inspiration, I think they better look back at that Wales in 2016, emulate what they did, or at least try to. They topped England in that group against all the odds, made it all the way to the semis, losing to the eventual winners, Portugal. So I think there's some lessons to be learned for the Scots in that.
And the entire focus on this group is for Scotland and England for the obvious historical rivalry, and what an unbelievable moment that would be just at Wembley between those two clubs. But I think we're kind of getting lost with what Croatia could do in this group. Greg, I mean, how do you feel about the Croats, where they really kind of surprised a lot of people who aren't necessarily kind of diving into the world of football week in and week out at the last international competition? I don't know. Do you feel like they've improved, kind of regressed a little bit? It seemed like a dream tournament for them 2 years ago. What do you expect from the Croats?
Well, personally, looking back at their, fairy tale run to the final where they eventually lost in the World Cup there against France, I think it was like a cocktail of, obviously there's a lot of talent in that midfield, and it's a cocktail of, avoiding the bigger teams in the knockout stages and getting to that stage. I'm not taking any credit away from their run. Judging from their, their qualifying campaign, either in the European qualifying campaign, some friendlies I've watched them play, in the World Cup qualifying campaign, obviously it's still early days, I think they've regressed a little. Obviously, you can't discount that midfield talent of that Luka Modric, that Marcelo Brozovic, who was very much the unsung hero in Inter's title challenge this season, the engine that kept that team running slick. So they obviously have a lot of talent in midfield. The obvious concern is that their center backs, they're on the wrong side of 30, so it will be interesting to see if they could keep out that English firepower. Scotland, obviously, as well, is dangerous. Watching the Czechs play against Italy made me rate them a bit lower than I initially had them. They looked out of sorts. I get it's a preparation game and whatnot. You're going to be resting some of your players. You don't want to show your hand. But I think, in my opinion, Croatia, speaking of them, they have regressed a little. Can't understate that talent though. So it's going to come down to them in Scotland for that second spot. It all depends on can they keep out the goals and can they get those timely goals. Remains to be seen. I just don't think that they're what they used to be, that they made the final.
Yeah, Kristian, I mean, obviously England are going to want to get revenge over Croatia. What kind of damage do you think that they can do in this group?
England?
It's Croatia.
Croatia, yeah. I agree with Greg. I think that Croatia obviously have dropped back a lot. I love them heading into the World Cup last year. It didn't surprise me in 2018 that they went to the World Cup final at all. I thought there was a lot of players peaking at the right time. I'm concerned about the defense. It's quite old, not a lot of stability there, although Kaleta has been very good for Marseille. Big Don Vida as well had a great season again, with him, with Besiktas winning the double in Turkey. So, they don't have Mandzukic now, and very often to try and get that goal is important, to try and get that one moment when you're going to get a big goal in a game, and sometimes you can rely on him like they often did. I think, again, that first game is so important because all the pressure's on England, right? Heading into the group. And a lot of people have written them in stone. They're going to win the group right away. And I think Croatia will look at that and think, okay, we'll take the underdog label here. We're a World Cup finalist. We beat you in the semi-finals. We feel like we can do damage controlling and control this game pretty easily, put the pressure on them as well. It is difficult for them. They're playing 2 away games, technically, which is obviously another big storyline in this competition. So I don't see them as being a major threat to go too far in the latter stages of this tournament.
And who cannot wait to see the glorious blonde ponytail of Domagoj Vida running back up and down the pitch for a lot of people who missed that over the last couple of years. Not too many people tuning in, I think, to the Turkish league, but yeah, not too shabby for Besiktas. Let's go over to England now, Kristian. I mean, it finally was done. The 26-man roster is finalized. Ben White from Brighton Hove Albion is the final entrant after Trent Alexander-Arnold got injured in one of the 2 friendlies to start it off. Are you surprised? Obviously, the fitness of Harry Maguire is the big talking point going into this tournament, but Jesse Lingard and James Ward-Prowse both playing pretty well over those last two friendlies. Are you surprised that they went with Ben White as their 26th man?
I wasn't surprised. No, I think it's a really good decision. I think they need depth in that position anyway. There's still chances they're going to play back three in the tournament. So, I think you need another centre back. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they need to put him in a position where he might get ahead of Connor Cody at one point as well. So, no, I'm fine with him being in the tournament. I don't think Lingard would have got enough minutes. There's too many players who I think can do what you want from Lingard anyway. When you look at England's strength, you've got players who can play in those attacking third players like Foden and Grealish, and Mount can play further forward, and Sancho and Saka can play there, and Sterling and Rashford. So I just don't think there's a place for Jesse Lingard for me, even though he can be quite effective as a player. Maybe Ward-Prowse, because obviously his set-piece delivery I think could be a bit of a loss, but I think he is there if Henderson struggled. And again, the emergence of Jude Bellingham, a player that I like a ton, just for me makes that, with Bellingham in there and Phillips and Rice, I just don't think you need another central midfielder like Ward-Prowse in that position, Greg.
Yeah, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with that. I think a lot of people are making a big deal out of this 26th man. You mentioned that Ben White he's the type of player that if they do pivot to a back three, gives them a lot of a skill set that the other center backs just may not have. He's very progressive with his passing, solid at the back. So in that regard, as much as they'd love to see Harry Maguire fit. He's come a long way over the last season. I find personally he's been a rock for Manchester United up until the injuries. It's definitely smart to get that extra center back, and you definitely touched upon it again with Jude Bellingham. That's a player that is built for these big moments. He's 17, but he plays with that, he exudes that confidence of a veteran. I personally think that if England want to string together a deep run and Gareth Southgate wants to find that balance in the midfield, Bellingham will be a part of it. I know he's young, but if he wants that balance, obviously right now you're looking at it's a Henderson or Rice in the deep lying, right in front of the back four, the back three, depending what he goes with. And then I guess Mount further ahead of him. Who will be that third partner? You could go with a more offensive presence in Foden, or you put him on the left wing like Guardiola does, or you could go with Bellingham, who in my opinion is your best bet for that box-to-box presence. So, yeah, as much as I would have loved to see Ward-Prowse as well, deadly from set pieces, played all 38 games in the Premier League this season. He's as much as he'd like to be there, he deserves the rest as well. It's been a long year for him, a couple of years.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, if you're building your team around a set-piece specialist, I think that England have way too much talent to actually do that. Not a bad guy to sub on, but Kristian, you mentioned that with the actual with the lineup in and of itself. I've been listening to a whole bunch of podcasts and radio shows over the past week or so. Somehow, Jack Grealish, Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Raheem Sterling, Harry Kane, Mason Mount, and Phil Foden are all going to start for England. Don't exactly know how that's going to happen, even if it is a 3-5-2 or a back four. I mean, I think that the way Grealish is played, he almost is a locked-on starter at left wing. But how do you see this shaking out in terms of the starting 11 for England?
Yeah, it's fascinating. They can go in so many different directions. I think Grealish is really interesting because he obviously brings something that they don't have. He's got a little bit of that Gascoigne element to him where he's outstanding in the dribble and will open up teams, by ability to go past people. Mount has that in him as well. Mount actually, I think, is better at finding spaces and really penetrating into those spaces and opportunities in between the lines. The thing about Grealish is that, I see him a lot because obviously Villa's my club. And the one thing I would be a little bit concerned is that big moments, he hasn't had a lot of experience, and I just don't think, I wouldn't want him to feel like he can try and do too much. And I think that would be a conversation that Southgate's got to have with him. I think he can bring something to England that they don't have. But when I look at players other players who could play in that position, I like the idea of playing Kane through a middle and having two rapid players on the wings, whether it be two of Sancho, Rashford, or Sterling, who can really run behind. And having that player that Grealish can bring almost in Mason Mount in a midfield three, where you can play Mount as that player that Grealish can bring and also play, or Foden in that position as well. So, there's a lot of decisions there that they've got to make. It's an incredibly deep squad and he's got to get it right. But the level of quality around with Grealish, I understand, but I don't necessarily think that he can be the man right from the start. And maybe they're going to have to make some changes, Greg, as they go through the tournament.
And yeah, I think if the Euros really coming home this year, I think Southgate is initially the first step after announcing his squad, what he's going to have to do with a lot of these talented players who, in many cases, they're stars for the respective teams in either the Premier League or Sancho with, Dortmund. He has to manage expectations and he has to evolve himself as a manager, because when you have a squad as deep as this, he would be foolish not to utilize it and mix and match according to the situation in the game. Unless if you're playing a deep block, maybe you do need Grealish to his creativity to unlock that, beat his man, feed it to Kane. But if you're playing a side that, maybe they find themselves in a game against Germany in the knockout stages, they're going to want that pace on the wings to beat that high line. So I think more than anything, Southgate himself has to evolve as a manager. At the end of the day, it is nice playing with an identity. I mean, you look at a team like Italy, they have a very, what you're getting from them, game in, game out, possession-based style. It's good to have that identity set. However, at a tournament like this with a deep squad like this, I would like to see Southgate and England mix and match depending on the opposition, provided that they're approaching these games with the same mentality and the same approach.
And not only that, I mean, I think that Southgate has made it pretty clear that he's trying to do that. But I'm very fascinated to see, because we've seen England with all the star power they've had at previous tournaments. I think of Lampard and Gerrard kind of getting in each other's way. It's always been kind of fitting those round pegs into square holes for England. And I wonder if someone like Mason Mount, either in a midfield three, just ahead of Declan Rice, can kind of be that link for someone, either Grealish or Foden. Because I agree with you, Kristian, in that the two runners, I mean, you just watched Tottenham this year with Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. I'm not saying that they're going to have that chemistry, but Kane is very, very good as a provider. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see if they go with two of those men. Jadon Sancho, didn't watch a whole lot of Borussia the second part of the season, but they said that people have said that he had a fantastic finish to the year after what was kind of an up and down start. So it's very interesting for me. Who do you think is going to be, of those three in Foden, Mount, and Grealish, do you think one of those three or two of those three get in? And between Rashford, Sterling, and Sancho, one or two of those three get into the starting lineup?
I think Mason Mount has to play. For me, it's an automatic. I think he has to play. He has to start, and because for me, I think he can play as that attacking midfielder as a three. He can cover. I don't want to see three stoppers. I don't necessarily think they need to play that way. If you play a Rice with a Bellingham and a Mount, I like the balance. So I think that works well for me. And then depending on who your opponents are, if you play Croatia, I think you need pace. So, if you play Scotland on a deep block, I think you need Foden. So, or Grealish, so I think you're going to mix it up. But I think you need pace against Croatia. And I would play Sancho. I would play Sancho for me. The one thing about Sancho, I think, is a little bit more, I would lean on him to be a little bit more efficient. The one issue that Rashford and Sterling have is that when they get that moment, and often you only get one, do you back him to score? That moment, Harry Kane comes in, it's tight game, it's a tight game, he plays, he back to goal, he sends him through, it's a one-on-one, it's Sterling, it's Rashford, it's one-on-one with the goalkeeper, bang, are they scoring? That's the moment. I don't know if they are. Sometimes they take 2, 3, 4 chances to get the moment. So I think Sancho's a little bit more efficient. I would back him to do that more than them. But yeah, a lot of it's down to the opponent. But just talking about it, it does really strengthen England's case when you've got all these guys on the team. And Southgate certainly is a very blessed manager.
And we can't even start getting into who's going to play left back or right back. I mean, that was the whole conversation before that. And Chilwell or Shaw at left back, or Trippier at right back, Kyle Walker even. It's going to be fascinating to see how Gareth Southgate mixes this all up. But let's move on to Group E. I think that the main story going into Group E, obviously Spain is expected to carry this group, but no Sergio Ramos. I know he was injured for large portions for Real Madrid, but in the same way that people have been critical of Southgate for bringing maybe an unfit Harry Maguire or Jordan Henderson, I don't see anyone at center back for Spain who can really kind of take up that mantle for Sergio Ramos. Do you think that they made the right decision, Greg, by not bringing him? And Is this a transition year for Spain?
It's very difficult to say because a guy like Ramos, his importance stretches well beyond the pitch. You watched him on the sidelines against Real Madrid, and I know DAZN loved panning over to him when something happened in the game. How he reacted, maybe a bit too much, and maybe that's playing into my judgment here. But when you have a 26-man roster, and Busquets just dropped out of the lineup because he tested positive for COVID-19, and you lose a big veteran presence in the locker room in Sergio Busquets. And honestly, I found he was a bit underrated even this season. People thought he was washed. That wasn't the case. He was making Barca tick. Besides the point, I like their center back options. I don't think on the base of current form Ramos would have played or would have started. You have a very young center back in Pau Torres, sensational for Villarreal. Over the Europa League run, Laporte naturalized them, just before the tournament. So they have options in that respect at the back. But I don't see the harm in bringing him as that extra man in the locker room just to motivate everyone. He's been there. He has the know-how. I don't think it would have taken away anything from the locker room. With that being said, Luis Enrique, just judging from his call-ups, he made Jordi Alba captain. He's entrusting a lot of the new generation, the likes of Dani Olmo and Oyarzabal. It's looking like he's heading in a clear direction. So if you really want to do that at 100% and usher in a new era of Spanish talent, you might not want Ramos's shadow looming large over you. So I could understand it. If I was the manager, I'd make different decisions. But that's why I'm talking on Zoom with you guys, and I'm not calling the shots at the Spanish Federation.
Oh, well, only a little bit of time, Greg. I'm sure you're on your way right there. But it makes it even more curious, Kristian, because they only took, now with Busquets dropping out, it's only 23 out of 26. They didn't even get to the allotted 26 guys. It's just, it seems like a curious decision from that point of view, if not to just have, like Greg said, Ramos as cheerleader in chief.
Yeah, I think they've called up Fornals and Rodrigo Moreno, and there's a few other people, whether they're officially part of the squad or not. They've kind of added them to the Spanish bubble. But you're right, they only initially named 24. I think it's quite fascinating to read into this because, Luis Enrique doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. That's the way he is. He's got that about him. It is his way or the highway. I don't think Sergio Ramos was ready to play. And, fitness-wise, a lot of this and a lot of the harmony and the unity comes together. You've got to know that when you bring a player like that who isn't ready to play right away, what kind of personality is he going to be? Now, they only know that. We don't know that, I got a lot of time for Ramos. I think he's incredibly, underrated, really, when you talk about what a legends of the game he's done and what he's achieved in the game. But do they need that shadow over them if they have a shaky moment? And I'm talking about Pau Torres, Enric Laporte, those kind of players, Diego Llorente maybe. Or maybe they just need to know that they're the man. They're the men that guide this team through it. So I like this team a lot. I think they're a team that are full of talent. It's remarkable that there's not one Real Madrid team player on there. It's remarkable when you think about some of the players they want in this team, like Isco, who didn't have a great year. Sal Niguez, one of my absolute favorites, didn't have a great year. Didn't get picked in the 23. It's in 24. It's absolutely incredible for me. But like Greg said, the younger players are there. The key for them is can they be more efficient in the final third? It's always going to be easy on the eye. They're going to pass teams for fun. They're playing teams who are going to sit very deep in low blocks in the group at home. All games at home. Can you beat them? Can you open them up? And that will be the pressure on them. Can they get a goal scorer? Can Gerard Moreno continue his form from Villarreal? Can Alvaro Morata do it if he's the man? But yeah, lots of players that are on this team. Marcos Llorente, I'm a big fan of him. A lot of players on this team that I like.
And sorry, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, John. No worries.
Well, I was just going to say the second spot in Group E, I'm fascinated because I wanted to see, and we've been blessed for the past decade with the kind of second tiers of stars that are behind Messi and Ronaldo. And for me, it's the two guys who are going to represent Poland and Sweden in Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Robert Lewandowski, who's coming off probably the best season in Bundesliga history, definitely since Gerd Muller. But I'm curious to see, now that Zlatan is out of it for Sweden, not joining the team, you're expecting that Real Sociedad's Alexander Isak could potentially have a really coming out party at this Euro. Greg, for Poland, I think that no Zlatan kind of puts it in their, it puts the ball in their court, so to speak. Do you think that the players around Robert Lewandowski can both give him the service that he needs, and can they put together a cohesive team defensively?
I think rather than individuals, every time you look at Poland at a major tournament, Lewandowski notwithstanding, best striker in the world, it's more so a good group that's very a cohesive unit rather than a collection of individuals. Speaking of that one player I'm looking to link up with Lewandowski is undoubtedly Napoli's Zielinski. This is a player that is ambidextrous, occupies great positions in the final third. Could find the back of the net, could help out in the defensive zone. I am really high on Piotr Zielinski, really, really high. So if there's that one player on this Polish side that I'm looking to for a big tournament, it's undoubtedly him. Beyond that, though, you know what you're getting from Poland. It's a solid 4-4-2. They're hoping to nick a goal here and there through Lewandowski, through that big striker, small striker setup. It was a shame to see Milik drop out. Obviously, he's dealt with some of his injury problems. He's been wasteful in front of goal himself over the last, he kind of has a reputation that Kristian was alluding to earlier of if that chance falls to him, will he bury it? I have my doubts, but that's still another player that has some good chemistry with Lewandowski. So more to that point, I think Poland, especially without, Zlatan there, Kulusevski, one of Sweden's young stars other than Alexander Isak, just tested positive for COVID-19. Does that also alter the balance in the group? And does that swing the pendulum in the group? I think it might. I like Poland. Good goalkeeper in Szczesny. He's played those big Champions League moments, had a bit of an off year, regressed a bit. But he's going to want to prove himself. After all these Donnarumma rumors, now he's finally at PSG, no longer has that looming over his head. But he's going to want to show up, Szczesny. So I expect a big tournament from him.
And a mixed bag from Zielinski, at least from Napoli, since he signed there, but definitely seems like he's taking a step in the right direction. Kristian, who's that guy? Who's the creative foil for you for Sweden to kind of, in the same breath as Poland, they're going to try and do the same thing. They're going to try and nick a goal here or there, but they've proven, my goodness, as a Celtic fan, I've watched Henrik Larsson do some ridiculous things for Sweden over the years. They've proven that they've showed up at the big moments in international competition.
Yeah, they're very similar teams, really, aren't they? They've got a lot of experience, particularly defensively, a ton of experience. They're almost like club teams where you just know who's going to be playing every time you see them. For me, Sweden, it's Forsberg. I think with Leipzig, he's had a bit of an up and down couple of seasons. He's had some injuries as well, but he is their number 10. He wears the number 10. He's the player between the lines. He's the difference maker. He proved that in the World Cup last time as well, in the last 16 games as well. For me, it's him. I like Victor Claesson as well. He plays at Krasnodar. He can get you goals if anybody's looking out there to try and put guys in a pool. But I like this team. Berg is the kind of player, he needs 4 or 5 chances to get that one. Isak is a player, as you mentioned, he's got that, he's got that a little bit of sparkle about him, that little dust about them that you can sprinkle on and say there's a bit of magic there. They don't really have anywhere else. A player that can open up, and can he keep that consistency? He'll be excited to play the game against Spain, being obviously playing for Sociedad as well. He'll be familiar with that time to play there. So I think he could have a good tournament as well. And I think Sweden, I tend to like a lot of the Scandinavian teams. I think Denmark are going to go a long way in this tournament. I like the Swedes as well. I think they could do some damage, And I guess when you look at Sweden and Poland, what's a successful tournament? Getting out the group is essential. Winning that last 16 game is probably the difference between true success and moderate failure, I suppose.
And I don't want to skip over Group E as quickly as we did, but my goodness, the group of death. I mean, this is – I don't think I've ever seen a group with this much firepower at a major tournament ever. You're going to have France, Germany, and Portugal. Are we expecting Hungary to win it all? Potentially. No, I'm just kidding. But now that France have added Benzema, Kristian, I mean, it was really kind of the spot that, as much as you've seen Olivier Giroud do good things as both a sub for Chelsea, but leading the line for the French national team. And not only that, the way that he kind of just was dropped in and seamlessly is slotted in with Mbappe and Griezmann over the first couple of friendlies.
Yeah,
they're at just a juggernaut level that I don't think we've seen from France since '98, potentially.
Yeah, it's a real special team. There's a lot to like about them. But I'm probably lower on them than most because I think that the group is a real potential disaster for them. And I just think it's really hard to win games in international football. And they play 2 away games in this group to start with. That's not going to be easy. Like, I don't expect them to roll over Hungary. I think they'll probably beat them, and I think they'll probably get out the group okay. But there's a real difficult pathway for them if everyone thinks they're going to win this. They're really going to have to earn it. I'm with you. Obviously, dropping Benzema in there and it's seamlessly looking fine with Griezmann and Mbappe's looked tremendous. It was the area of concern for them because if you take Benzema out the team, who's been the true number 9, Giroud's not played a lot of minutes. So, he's perfect as that impact guy off the bench, but he's proven to be an outstanding player at club level to do that. So that's important. Again, the balance of midfield, is it going to be okay with Kanté and Pogba? Are they going to do what they're able to do in Russia in 2018? Defensively, they look pretty solid as well. Obviously, Hernandez and Pavard are there. And, obviously, they still got Varane and Langley from Barcelona. Jules Koundé, if he can play, I'm a big fan of him at Sevilla. Always have question marks about Tottenham goalkeeper Hugo Lloris. Not a massive fan. I think he could make a big mistake in a key moment again. So look, they're like an all-star team, but all-star teams don't always win, and they got to get the chemistry right, and they got to get going pretty quickly. And as I said before, there's a fine line between success and failure in these tournaments, and I would not be shocked to see them slip up early in the Euros.
And Greg, to that point, as a keeper yourself, I mean, I agree with Kristian 100% in that, especially over the last 2 years, Hugo Lloris has really regressed for them. Is that really the weak link for France at this tournament? I mean, they just have so much depth, left back, right back, in the middle of the park. I mean, if N'Golo Kante has a similar kind of meshing with Paul Pogba, is Manchester United just going to spend £500 million and get him to go over there from Chelsea because it seems like he's the perfect foil for Paul Pogba? I mean, it really does come down to the goalkeeping, doesn't it, for France?
So looking player for player on their starting 11 and their expected starting 11, yeah, look, Hugo Lloris definitely sticks out. You think of his mistake at, when they lost the Euro, getting beat by that type of shot when he really should have. Concerns over if he was injured on the play before, notwithstanding. But beyond him, obviously I would have loved to see the new AC Milan keeper, Mike Maignan, get a shot. He was sensational for a little this season. Every time I watched him play, I never felt like he was going to concede. He was the clean sheets leader in the league. He earned himself a big move at Milan, and I think he's going to do great. So I would have loved to see him get some big minutes at a big tournament. Maybe the expectations were too high. But then moving away from actually looking at individual players on this team, my main concern, and I am super high on Benzema. I love him. I think he's that cherry on top of the cake. But my main concern is tactically, does that upset the balance of this team? Because now you hear reports that Deschamps is fiddling with this narrow diamond of a 4-1-2-1-2 to accommodate Benz, Mbappe, and Griezmann centrally. And quite frankly, they don't have the fullbacks that bomb forward. Benjamin Pavard is a center back. Obviously, we saw it at Euro and the World Cup rather. He could get 40. He got that super goal. But that super goal, no, it's that besides that super goal, he's not really the type of fullback that offers you that width and that depth going forward. Same thing for Lucas Hernandez. Great defensive player, not going to concede much one-on-one in a situation, but he's not going to be that Alphonso Davies to go beyond this man and overlap on the wing. So a lot of my concern is how are they going to get that width in the final third. Then you look at the midfield, Kante, Pogba, two of the best midfielders in the world. But are you really going to sacrifice Kante as your number 6 midfielder when he clearly thrives playing a bit further forward, a bit more of an active role? And then that leaves me to the Juventus man Rabiot, who is kind of like a not so good restaurant. One day you go, it's the best meal you've ever had. You go back next week, and you're looking at your plate underwhelmed. So I have a few question marks about France. They're mainly tactical. If we're talking about a player that might cost them a game or two, then it's obviously going to fall on the goalkeeper, just nature of the business.
And not only that, I mean, when you're talking about Deschamps there, I mean, just ask Maurizio Sarri how it worked at Chelsea, moving N'Golo Kante around in that midfield. Didn't exactly work wonders for them. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how that formation works out. Kristian, I was writing the obituary for Germany before this whole thing even started, because Joachim Low decides to bring in Mats Hummels and some older players that he said were done. Thomas Muller in from the cold for his final international tournament for Germany. It feels like it's kind of a mixed bag of, similar to Spain, in that the young and the old are kind of overlapping with one another, and then they destroy Latvia 7-1 in their final friendly there. I mean, what are your expectations for the Germans? They're such an unpredictable force and can be kind of the team of the tournament at any given moment.
Yeah, write them off at your peril, right? I mean, that's that's the way I feel about them. I like them a lot, and I think they could do damage. Again, playing games at home. One of the best goalkeepers on the planet, Emmanuel Neuer, experience at the back with Hummels coming back in. Rudiger in a great Champions League final. I like Robin Gosens a lot from Atalanta. I think he's a great player. Kimmich, for me, arguably the best player in that position in the world. Toni Kroos, obviously still only 31, a magnificent deliverer at set pieces, which are crucial in these tournaments. Goretzka can really make the runs out of midfield. If you can get Leroy Sané playing a lot and getting electric going forward. Gundogan's just had a tremendous season. Muller's come back in as well, because the one thing they lack is the goal scorers. They need an ability to find goals. And what does Muller do? He scores goals in big tournaments. If you're relying on the Chelsea boys, Havertz and Werner, to get goals, not necessarily sure about that. It might be Muller, it might be Gnabry or somebody like that to get them. But I understand why people are writing them off a little bit after a difficult World Cup, but I think they're going to be fine, guys. I think they're going to get out of the group fine, and I wouldn't want to play them. I look at that last 16 game and think, oh, they could be playing England in Wembley at last 16. And if I'm England, then I've got that again, and it's coming home, and it's the rematch of the Euro 96 semi-final, and you're England. You go, here we go again, not playing these guys, please. You wouldn't want to play them. It's not a team you look at and go, I want to play them. You wouldn't want to play them. So, I think, for me, they're one of the teams in the tournament that could win it all. Obviously, people have not really backed them, but of course they could win it.
And wouldn't that be poetry that the man who could not seem to score for Chelsea, even though he had a pretty decent debut season in Timo Werner, comes back to haunt England in the final of the Euros? It would just be kind of a poetic justice for a guy who was roundly. I mean, for a guy who scored with decent regularity, I believe it was 11 goals on the season. I mean, you want him to score as much as he did for RB Leipzig, but the things that he was doing in terms of his movement was very good, even though, of course, you even saw in the Champions League final spurning one or two chances there. Moving over to Portugal, I mean, I've never seen, and I remember Bruno Alves and Pepe at the beginning of their careers at the center back position for Portugal. It's always kind of been a little bit of a question mark for them over the last couple of international competitions. Now you have Ruben Dias from Manchester City giving them just an unbelievable player. I believe named the PFA Player of the Year by sports writers in England. And they have an incredibly functional midfield. And then you have guys running along to support Cristiano Ronaldo. Kristian, what are you expecting from the Portugal team? Because I think that a lot of people expected going into the season that João Felix was going to have a massive part to play for Portugal, really struggled at Atletico Madrid this year. Do they have enough going forward to take care of business?
I think that's a great question. I think it is the question. I think ultimately this is a team that so much to like, right? They've got those reference points. So many of those players that know how to do it, know how to win now. You've got a good mix of youth and experience. You've got young players. You mentioned João Felix. Jota's still only, 24? Andre Silva's coming into his own at 25. You think about Renato Sanchez had a terrific season again at Lille. He was the poster boy. He was supposed to have failed, and he's still only 23. So there's a lot of players that can make a difference. Can they get that goal scorer? Can they get that man who's going to make a difference? And how can we write off Ronaldo? It's probably going to be his last Euros. He's 36. You never say never, but I would imagine it would be. So I think that's the difference. Can they get those key goal scorers in key moments? Again, in a difficult group, the things could go wrong pretty quickly, I suppose. But I like them. I like them a ton, Greg, and I think they could win it all again. I don't think they probably will. I think I have them going to the final, maybe losing, but I think they could go a long way here again.
No, they definitely have all the talent mix that you want. You have the world-class center backs. You have those deadly fullbacks. That just makes, in my opinion, arguably the most, the most solid back four in the tournament between Ruben Diaz and the experience of Pepe, Rafa Guerrero, João Cancelo on the right. That's the most talented back four in the tournament by far.
Yeah.
Up front, no complaints on this end. You have Diogo Jota, you have Ronaldo, you have a mix of João Felix and Bernardo Silva. It's a matter of all those elements coming together. In my opinion, I'm very, very curious to see if Fernando Santos releases the shackles in midfield. He's a bit of a pragmatic manager. It worked well for them in 2016. Made it all the way to the final off the back of a very solid and pragmatic setup with those two holding midfielders in there. In the warm-up games, we're seeing a lot of Danilo Pereira for PSG, man, who didn't have his best season. And Sergio Oliveira is coming off his most prolific season, albeit with a lot of penalty shots. But I'd be more interested to see if, a guy like Renato Sanchez could come in there and alter the balance of that midfield, inject some, that enterprise that in my opinion, that is lacking. Obviously, you're playing against high-powered teams like France and Germany, so you might go for that more pragmatic two defensive mid setups. In my opinion, I wouldn't go that way just because, you kind of want to have those runners in behind and to break these types of teams down. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, especially how they approach that first game. So in this group, the group of death, first game is probably the most important. By the time it's the last game, you're just a matter of, seeing out the result that you absolutely need. So it will be interesting to see. I definitely have Portugal going to the semifinals at the very least. And just agreed to on your last point regarding Germany. I just as before the podcast started, I looked at the roster because I saw that Muller and Hummels were included again. That team is stacked. They have 5 midfielders that would start at any team. Like a guy like Florian Neuhaus, who you barely hear about, was pulling all the right strings in the Champions League, and he's not even going to start. So yeah, I think France winning the Euro and getting that favorite tag, it might be premature just given how deep Portugal and Germany are. Just looking at these teams, they are juggernauts, man.
And it feels like the X factor for me for Portugal, just having watched Liverpool so much this year, when they didn't have Diogo Jota either coming off the bench or just in the lineup whatsoever, they looked like a completely different team when Mane and Salah were really struggling. And I feel like he could have a real breakout tournament there. So let's get to it, especially for Group D. Who are your picks? I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going with France and Portugal. The 7-1 victory for Germany has shaken my confidence, but it has not changed my pick. Greg, who do you feel is the two teams moving it out of the group of death?
Well, not to use a technicality, but I think we're going to see that the best third place team is going to be one of these European. But if I had to go 1-2, I'll go off the I'll go Germany 1, France 2, Portugal 3, and Portugal comes out as the third.
Kristian?
I'll take Portugal 1, Germany 2, France 3, Hungary 4. France may not get out of the group.
Wow. That's a bold prediction.
Hey,
that's
what we're here for.
They've already won their tournament, so they can enjoy a long off season. Kristian, thank you so much for joining us. Take it easy, and we'll cover groups A through C tomorrow on the second Euro preview episode of the Footy Pod. Ciao for now.